Thanks very much, everyone, for coming back so promptly after lunch. We all are under a little bit of time pressure, not just to get our panel completed, but also to make sure that we're moving time in a timely way throughout the rest of the afternoon. There's a lot of very, very interesting speakers and discussions yet to come. But I'm very, very pleased to be able to host or moderate this panel session with a number of very, very distinguished speakers. I also just want to add how proud we are at the United States Studies Center to have been a principal sponsor for the In the Zone conference this year and to have worked closely with the tireless organizers of In the Zone to try and help shape the program and make those sorts of contributions as well. Just underscore also just how happy we are at the United States Studies Center to have had a role in the creation of the U.S. Asia Center here at the University of Western Australia, and how much we're looking forward to working with Gordon and his entire team in the years ahead. Well, this will run similarly to the previous panel that we had led by Professor Stephen Walt. You have the names of the speakers and their backgrounds there in front of you. I don't think we'll need to take time to introduce them one by one, but just to say that this is really an excellent collection of expertise here. Persons whose backgrounds are truly international, but have always had as their primary focus issues in relation to the zone, to Australia and Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific questions. What we wanted to do today is delve into a couple of interesting issues related to the security of the region. And I'm just going to toss out a couple of questions for our speakers to respond to very briefly, and then carry on a conversation from there. Earlier this morning, Professor Walt tried to get his panel to reflect upon what were some of the longer-term trends that they felt were shaping the environment in the Indo-Pacific. We didn't get too much there into the sort of short term. What's staring us right in the face? What do we really need to be worried about, like next week or within the next couple of months? And in particular, I'm hoping the panelists might be able to inject some issues that are perhaps underappreciated, issues that don't get the kind of attention that you think could really be a disruptive and troubling set of problems that could unfold very, very near term. Let me open it up first and to ask Linda, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a very brief response to that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Bates. And let me take this opportunity to say thank you for the invitation to be here. It's my first in Perth, for real. And I am very much looking forward also to working with Gordon Flake and his team. Short term, what's looking us in the face? In my opinion, the present maritime tensions between the Philippines and the United States. Oh, excuse me, Philippines and China. Sure. I wrote the United States. I don't know what I was thinking about. These tensions are playing out on nearly a weekly basis around the disputed islands and shoals. I think both parties have been very provocative in their measures at sea. They sort of taunt each other back and forth. This appears from the outside to be a battle between David and the Goliath, after all. I mean, big China with its rapidly modernizing navy against small little Philippines. But I think we have to remember from the Chinese point of view that if they give in to some of the demands of the Philippines, it's going to set a precedent from the Chinese point of view. There at the moment, clearly the Maritime Law Enforcement Agency vessels under very strict orders to follow different levels of rules of engagement. For example, they're not yet allowed to bump the Philippine boats when they try and shoo them away from disputed waters, but we'll see that happen next. Then suddenly we have an incident where provocation on both sides leads to shooting. If this would happen, I think it would be a real security challenge for this region. And what the United States would do, following in the steps of the Obama visit, and his visit to the Philippines, I think will be very crucial as we look ahead in the coming years of how actually to manage what Peter Varghese this morning was talking about, incidents, intentional or not.
So possible unintended, perhaps, unintended miscalculation on the part of either of those parties could lead to something much more troubling. Yoichi, you want to chime in here?
Sure. Since this, according to the program, this session is supposed to focus on the traditional security. So let me just first clarify. What's the zone in traditional security context? I may destroy the kind of spirit of cooperation that Minister Bishop laid out this morning, but the zone is inside the second island chain of in the Pacific. Second island chain being Japan, Guam, and all the way to Australia. And where China tries to establish a no-fly zone or no freedom of navigation zone. That's the zone in traditional security context. And that's the area where the battle between China and the United States is actually being fought right now. While China is trying to establish what they call anti-access area denial, A280 capability, while the United States trying to defend its power projection capabilities in spite of China's A280. And what she just mentioned is just one symptom which emerges out of this battle between China and the United States. And so is Senkaku, which is actually source of the tension between Japan and China right now. And look what happened just a couple of weeks, over the couple of weeks. Tension is actually rising in this region with the rise of China's military capabilities and radicalization of China's intention and response from the United States and China. The president's visit to the region, what did he do? When he was in Japan, he said that Japan's security treaty will apply to Senkaku. That triggered a question from China. That means the United States is going to fight with Japan against us. That's the question being asked. And what the president did what did he do in Philippines? He signed what they call Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which gives the United States to have an opportunity, authorization to rotate through Philippine facilities. What do they tell you? The tension. That's what's happening. And I just wanted to point out that's where things are right now.
Do you see, though, then, as a result, an increased likelihood of a direct clash between U.S. and Chinese armed forces?
And of course, none of us are stupid to really seek the actual conflict out of this tension. And I think all of us are reasonable enough. We're not North Korea, so we are, I think, reasonable enough to try to avoid a conflict. But just as she said, unintentional conflict is something that we really have to worry about.
And so so in terms of staring us in the face, the two so far have pointed to these sort of unintended, almost accidental miscalculations. Takeo, do you see that as well, or do you see something else being problematic for us in the near term?
Well, to me, democracy, this single word, seems to be the most challenging agenda for Indo-Pacific area for the next 5 years, because for the last 50 years, except for U.S., all the countries in this region has been rushing to promote democracy and also economic development. And democracy functioned to promote prosperity, but at the same time, it has been delayed in the name of authoritarian planned economic development. And you see North Korea, reasonable enough, their policy sticking to a nuclear weapon and ICBM, but from the surface, this young and predictable leadership seems to be solid in terms of its power base, but I can also see some cracking down of local area and also mutual suspicions and lazy moves inside core elite groups. So we can never say that nothing is going to happen in North Korea. That's also a democracy issue because it means South Korean absorbing North Korea and unifying a Korean peninsula under the name of free democracy and market economy. It will impact US alliance policy, and also it will challenge a Chinese security policy. China also struggling to have their own terms of democracy, and also Japan, a history education for the next generation, and also comfort woman issue. These issues and does not really reflect the mature level of current Japanese democracy. Korea also taking advantage of its own nationalism to use history issue for the voters and domestic politics. This is also a challenge for Korean democracy. Southeast Asian countries, some countries are still democratizing, and we have yet to see if Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi can successfully run for next presidency in Myanmar. So a lot of connection with religion, multi-ethnic conflict, terrorism, these kind of all challenges against democracy is happening in Pacific Asia and Indo-Pacific area for the next 5 years to come.
Are you confident that the militaries or even the political leadership of the two Koreas have in place sort of rules of engagement that would minimize the likelihood of clashes getting out of control, or is that something we need to be worried about?
I think North Korean leadership for the last half a century has been reasonable or clever enough not to make any provocation spill over into another full-scale war. That's why they have limited their provocation on the West Sea, and also they limited their nuclear test and missile test out of the Korean peninsula. So US-Korea deterrence system has been working quite nicely, but the problem is a Chinese attitude and international society's inconsistent approach to North Korea simply due to their cyclic domestic election politics has been allowing North Korea to play around, but they have never been thinking of full-scale war so far.
Your comment about democracy I found quite interesting because I think it resonated with what we heard earlier this morning from Dr. Dino Pati-Dajjal, who was making the point that, especially in Southeast Asia, we're seeing this very interesting transformation of hierarchical societies progressing rapidly economically, which is then transforming the expectations of the middle class and the lower classes as well, which is going to impact, I think, very much how, can the models of democracy that are in places like Indonesia or elsewhere, can they absorb what's going to be this remarkable societal change? Stephen, what are your thoughts?
Well, on that point, I thought Dino made a very good point, which is in the end, the great mass of a country, whether it's Australia, Southeast Asia or North Asia, or in the Indian Ocean Rim, the great mass of a country will want to chase prosperity. And in the end, I think the explosion of middle-class numbers wanting prosperity and the old adage that in the end it's the communists who make the best capitalists, we'll see the chase for prosperity overcome the risk of adverse security outcomes. In terms of your first question, what are the immediate risks? I'm 4th out of 4, so I'll mop up. One, I think underappreciated is that North Korea's nuclearisation program continues to be a risk to us. Having said that, the North Koreans are the masters of provocation, to which the Republic of Korea has been most restrained over a long period of time, particularly more recently. But whilst they're the masters of provocation, they're also very adroit judges, and they've become very good over decades at getting the international community to reward them for bad behaviour without going over the top. a lesser risk, but one which is underappreciated, and either in the materials or in your question was anything unanticipated or underappreciated. It's always the unanticipated ones that cause you trouble, but underappreciated, I continue to believe, is Iran's nuclear program and the potential for Iran to do something really stupid in the Straits of Hormuz. So at one level, they're the two that you would worry about most because you're dealing with, in a sense, unpredictable regimes. But in terms of short-term risk of miscalculation or unbridled nationalism getting out of control of common sense, it's the maritime and territorial disputes, which all of the colleagues have referred to. And there it's not necessarily a strategic design, but a miscalculation on the ground. Little appreciated, in the last couple of weeks, after 22 years' work, we saw the West Pacific Naval Symposium meeting in China agree, after 22 years of work, that all of the navies in the West Pacific, which includes all of the ones involved in maritime and territorial disputes that we've referred to, signed up for a code of unanticipated contact at sea. It's called CUES, and that's another drop of water on a marble tablet, which hopefully will see any unanticipated contact arising out of those maritime or territorial disputes resolved sensibly by the personnel of the navies concerned. And that was adopted in China a couple of weeks ago, and immediately people are now saying this is precisely what we will need down the track in the Indian Ocean Rim countries, and to work that through the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium and IRA. But I'm where the colleagues are. It's the miscalculation, the misjudgments, the unbridled nationalism off the back of maritime and territorial disputes, which really in the great scheme of things are small in terms of territory, but very large and potentially very adverse in terms of their potential.
All right, so we have a lot of votes here for miscalculation and unintended incidents that would potentially then spin out of control. I mean, obviously, those sorts of problems, those sorts of challenges have always been a part of international relations. I guess to dig a little bit deeper, my question would be, why is it so problematic now? What has changed in the region that has sort of brought these issues to the fore? Another way of looking at this that I've asked our panelists to contemplate is, has the largely successful structural framework for this region's security and prosperity over the last 40 years, have we come to the end of that run? Have we come to the end of that framework? What do I mean? I mean, rapid economic progress, deepening trade and investment interdependence, and I think important to add, the role of the United States as a sort of security guarantor in the region. On the back of that framework, we've had a great ride for the last 40 years. Are these developments we see now in the maritime sphere, some of the near-term challenges that you've all identified, is this the beginning of an unraveling? Or can that system that's served us so well over the last 40 years overcome them, right? Is it still solid? Are we still on stable ground here, Steve?
Well, you're seeing these tensions because we're going through a state of strategic flux, which is a result of economic and strategic and political and military power moving to our part of the world, to the zone, to the Indo-Pacific. Most people identify that almost exclusively through the rise of China, but it's not just the rise of China, it's the rise of China, the slower but inevitable and inevitable rise of India, and also the rise of the ASEAN economies combined. So the immediate tension is, and also there are some people who, when they see the rise of China, think automatically or somehow the United States is going away automatically, and that won't happen. So the tensions we are seeing is the tension between a phase where we're going through what was once a post-World War II duopoly or diarchy or hegemony of two, the Soviet Union, the United States. The Soviet Union collapses. For a period, you could say the United States was the only great or superpower which had unbridled, in a sense, strategic influence, and now you see the rise of China. So how does the world, how does the United States, how does China, how does our region, how does the world respond to the rise of another great power? And just as we get used to managing that, which will take some time and effort and trouble, but I'm an optimist, and the chase of prosperity will overcome any of the downside on the strategic or a security sense. We'll then have to grapple with the rise of India, and we'll then have, in my view, three great powers, two countries of 1.2 billion people, India and China, and the United States, having to make those same adjustments, and everything we've seen in the Pacific will also see occur in the Indian Ocean rim. So that's the phase we're going through, and as a great power rises, there are inevitably tensions. And the maritime disputes which involve China are important because they're the potential flashpoints as China rises as a great power, but how they are resolved by China and the other parties to those disputes, and how they're seen to be resolved by the region, including the United States, gives you a pointer as to how China will unfold ultimately strategically. Will it, as Peter Varghese quoted this morning from Zalek, will it evolve as a strategic power or a great power or a superpower as a responsible stakeholder, or, as the Chinese themselves say, into a harmonious environment? So in a sense, whilst it's also the short-term potential flashpoint and miscalculation, it's also, in my view, the best thing we currently have about the long-term view about how China will unfold in a strategic sense, whether it wants to play, as some people put it, by the rules of the road or by international norms or in accordance with the laws of the sea, UNCLOS, etc., or whether it wants to say, we're a great power, we define this as a core interest and everyone else just has to comply.
Linda, let me ask you this, just a different way of phrasing the question. If, I think Steve's right, the big change factor here is China's rise. Do you believe that the current Chinese leadership accepts and is comfortable with that framework that I just laid out, that the region can go another 30 or 40 years as long as we keep the economic engine running, as long as we continue to become more interdependent with one another economically, and as long as the United States and its friends continue to sort of keep the peace, as it were, in the region? Is that a model that the Chinese can live with?
I'm really happy you asked me that question, because I was thinking about that question as I listened to Steve, which I very much agreed with how you laid it out. I mean, it boils down to that question: does China want to kick the United States out of the region and take over the role of security guarantor in one way or another? And I mean, if China could wish for anything and get it, I'm sure China would like to see over the years the United States depart from Asia. But the Chinese are very pragmatic, and I think that the Chinese realize how many neighbors they have on land, 17. They have 8 maritime neighbors, maritime disputes with so many of them. They will see a very complex geostrategic landscape and not set as their goal getting the United States out of the region. Rather, they would like to find a way to push the United States somewhat further from its shores. For example, not breathing down the neck of the Hainan submarine base. In other words, the United States intelligence gathering operations near China's borders is something that really irritates the Chinese, and I think we'll see measures that China will take to try and have that stopped. I have heard actually there have been much fewer intelligence gathering operations. The United States has already decreased to a certain degree that. So I think there is a possibility that the two big countries will learn to live with each other. I always like to say to the Hugh White argument that on a daily basis, the United States and China are living with each other. They have over 60 dialogues. They're every day trying to prance around and figure out how to develop this new type of major power relationship. So to answer your question, yes, China would love to be the sole dominant power if they could live in an ideal world and they could dictate everything. But they're very pragmatic, and I think they will accept that they'll have to share power even as they rise.
Tego, do you see the model changing or needing to change, and if so, how?
Well, I think U.S.-China relations will not repeat the Soviet-U.S. relations we witnessed last half a century, because it is not an alliance competition. It is not a hostile ideological competition. China pursues socialism, but they care for reputation also. And also, international society pushes China to show more transparency. And at the same time, China does not have a Soviet-like Eastern European multilateral bloc. China simply tried to break down U.S. global alliance network without having its own bilateral alliance relationship. So in that sense, I think China and U.S. is exchanging their strategic interests while competing with each other. And ironically, I think U.S.-Japan alliance is also suiting Chinese suspicion against this democratic bloc, like a bottleneck theory, pushing down Japan and U.S. allies not too much provoke in this region. In that sense, I think a multilateral coordination somehow, although at a minimum level, can be agreed between Chinese and U.S. networks, such as Proliferation Security Initiative or a coalition against piracy to secure sea lines of communication over the Malacca Strait and the Indian Ocean, because these are all important to secure a sustained economic growth for all the countries in the region. And at the same time, I think these countries can cultivate more interdependent ways of trade and financial cooperation if they cannot solve North Korean problem, or if they cannot solve the dilemma of a dual dependence on China and U.S. by all the regions and the countries.
Yoichi Kato, something tells me you might not have the same view about the ability of